Good morning, afternoon, and evening, everyone. This is episode number 10 with Martin Blumender and Xavier Wilders, the CEO and CTO of Symbe, which is a new AI tech all about creating business cases at scale for GTM teams. This podcast is sponsored by the GTM AI Academy, your go-to resource for learning how to leverage AI in go-to-market teams and individual roles. You can find this episode on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, LinkedIn, and more. For more, go to gtmaiacademy.com. Welcome, everyone. I am so excited to have these two guys on me. I talked to Martin early on, a couple weeks ago, actually, I think now, and loved what he showed me. And then I had him convince Xavier, his CTO, to come on with us as well. And correct me, I don't want to make sure I say the name right. Is it Symbe?
Symbe, correct.
Symbe. Okay, make sure I know I said it a couple times, like maybe it's Symbe. I didn't want to say it wrong. So Symbe.
Not the first time.
Not the first time. Pre-seed company. They're super exciting stuff they're doing with their tech, with AI. But I want to make sure I get them on it because I loved his viewpoint around just the overall strategy of business cases and how to really align the sales process with the customer journey. And so obviously go-to-market professionals talk about all the time, and I just want to make sure I could have you on to talk about your perspective. So super excited to have you. So if you don't mind, let's start with Martin. I'll start with you. Do an intro about your background and then why you're doing Symbe, and then same with you, Xavier. After you get done, I'd love to hear both your kind of backgrounds and take us from there.
Great. I'll try to be very quick. Martin Blumender. I'm one of the founders and CEO at Symbe. I've been in digital entrepreneurship my whole career, from the first .com boom, where I launched an internet financial services company in Spain that was sold a couple of years later, and I've had a number of other businesses in the past. The reason why we launched Symbe a few months ago is because in my previous business, which was a digital health and wellness company, every time we would sell our service, we would be asked to help our champion build a business case, to collaboratively build a business case. And rather than do it on some ad hoc spreadsheet, we knew that there had to be a better way. And so the very, very quick version of the origin of Symbe was we wanted to build a much more effective, automated, and optimized way to generate business cases at scale. And that's why Symbe.
That's awesome, man. Okay, Xavier, go ahead. That was a good short synopsis play. That was pretty good.
I'm Xavier, CTO of Symbe, and I studied computer science, did a machine learning master's in Oxford University, and then founded a business in budgeting, so financial automation in the world of budgeting, about 8 years ago now. And Symbe is automation of business cases in sales enablement. So the tech is very similar, but the state of AI nowadays is so different. It's very exciting to be building tech in that space.
It was a match made in heaven, put it that way, match made in AI heaven.
I was gonna say, those sounds amazing. Like my company I work for full time is Symmetric. They do financial automation, but on a totally different realm. But I love you have those brains because I know the thought process and the method that it takes to get that point, which just shows volumes about what you guys are doing, which is pretty cool. So I know you're in pre-seed, so pre-products, so you don't have a lot of demos to show yet. So you're like trying to get things rolling, right? But I'd love to talk more about the theory you have. So walk me through what usually happens around business cases. I could probably do it too because I do it all the time. But in your perspective, what do most people go through and what's the pain? And then what are you wanting to mitigate with the tool you're building?
Sure. So the way that we're seeing it, so we are in market and we do have a number of beta customers on, and the product is effectively live. Thanks to Xavier, who's been enormously quick in developing something very robust. The way most companies do it, and we're talking companies that range from a GTM team of 5 to GTM teams of 500 or more, a lot of the companies do it the same way. First, the business case is something of an afterthought. It tends to happen at some case where the champion says, I like what you're doing, but let me see the value. What is a business case? It tends to be a reactive approach as opposed to a proactive collaborative. And when that happens, most, like 95% of the companies that we work with, have some form of a Frankenstein spreadsheet, right? With version 48 CBD or something like that. And everybody has a different version of it with slightly different or inconsistent variables. And it just creates a mess, right? A lot of time wasted, a lot of inconsistency. And if it's not collaborative, it means that the buyer really doesn't have a voice in the development of that business case. And we found a fundamental flaw in that process. And it's been really encouraging to see just how many companies, one, don't do this in a scalable, standardized way today, and how many companies kind of ask the question, well, why doesn't it exist? And that's very encouraging for us in that way.
So that obviously is the problem. So what you're able to do is to, my question is, I'm thinking in all sorts of ways for enablement. I know you and I talked about this, but I want to bring it up now so people can hear the conversation. So in enablement, we help with like both the RFP process, the mutual action plans, to, you know, building business case, all this kind of stuff to make sure people have access to what they need to, the salespeople and the customers when they need to, right? And a big challenge I'm seeing is, yes, there's Excel sheets, there's proposal docs, there's decks, there's all this stuff everywhere. They have to have 12 different things to make one thing happen. With your tool, you said automate and optimize. So does that mean, making sure I'm hearing my brain with this, that you
Sure.
integrate with different tools, like from the calls you're having, you get data from that to your RFP stuff and put it to that? Like, how do you make sure everything's correlated or communicating so it's aligned with what you're trying to build?
Yeah. Yeah. So I would start with the base platform. So imagine a sales team of a couple of hundred people. Any account exec would be able to log into the platform, have a library of pre-created templates, all built on the value proposition of that company. So if the value proposition is about time savings, efficiencies, different levels of ROI, or what have you, they could configure it for that specific scenario. So it could be net new, switch, expansion deal, renewal for customer success or renewal teams. But then, of course, be sub-tagged by mid-market, enterprise, sector, telco, aviation, or what have you. So they would be able to very quickly select a template in the same way that you can do today with, say, Notion or Miro boards or what have you. And all they would have to do is just name it for the company and effectively configure it in collaboration with their champion. So they can share it like a Google Doc, and together it says whatever variable is important, so number of employees or number of licenses, that would automatically be adaptive that specific scenario. And where we would fall in the process is, a lot of companies use us even in the early qualification, because they can demonstrate very quickly what their value proposition is and align it in collaboration with their champion. So their champion may want these variables, they can very quickly configure it. But we see ourselves very much a cohesive part of that tech stack, because with bi-directional data flows, with something like, you know, CRM like Salesforce or HubSpot or what have you, if you could pull in the data from initial discovery into Symbe, that would automate a lot of the inflow. But equally, as we understand from same Salesforce which deals are winning and which aren't, it automatically automates or optimizes which business cases are generating the highest success rates, and it auto corrects for those. And
that's
I'm
cool.
speaking
So
way
yes,
too much.
no, you're okay. So you're basically saying that you have the context of what has won in the past to help further new ones to be able to do better in the future, which is awesome. So I'm going to lean a little bit away from AI and go more to business case, because I think it's just something a lot of people have a challenge with, just the business case alone. Like, I'll give you an example. If you think about, I talk to a lot of enablement professionals as this, if we talk just the profession, there's a lot of people who are like, I don't know how to show causation correlation type metrics to what enablement does to show value so that the ROI is there, which is essentially what you're doing with the product, right? Whether it's a product or service. So my question is, like, when you come into a company and they're talking about business cases, because this is all on the hypothesis, they have something to actually build a business case off of. When you have someone who does not have a clear idea of what that is, what do you do to help them understand it's not a clear metric? Like, we got to help create something. How do you do that?
And it's a really good question, because that answers the question is how you different from an ROI calculator, right? An ROI calculator needs those metrics. A business case is, think of it as you're making the case for a decision, right? It's a supporting tool to help decide on initiative, an investment, an acquisition, or buying a technology. So with that in, a business case doesn't necessarily need to have hard numbers. It basically is built on a series of vignettes, of stories that talk about either the hard or the soft benefits of that solution. But even if you don't have the stats, with a business case, you also don't have one core one. You can have base case, best case, worst case, conservative case. So you can model a number of business cases or ranges from which both the buyer and seller are comfortable. So imagine if you're an ESG company, all focused on optimizing, you know, ESG considerations for carbon credits, right? You may not be absolutely certain the value of what that carbon saving may be for a specific company or industry, but in collaboration with your buyer, you can get the range of numbers, and you can build scenarios that say, right, within this range, we're comfortable delivering. And that you can't really get with an ROI calculator. So a business case doesn't necessarily need to have hard numbers, because the other benefit of a business case is it doesn't end with the deal. It's meant to be the foundation of a relationship between a buyer and a seller And so if you're able then to track performance by integrating also with business intelligence tools and have a layer of how you're doing versus the original business case, you can then configure and course correct based on your experience. And that's the power of why we feel business cases have a really fundamental role to play in the buyer-seller relationship, which is the whole reason of our name, right? Symbe is the symbiotic relationship between seller and buyer.
Yeah, I mean, even knowing this, I've been through, I don't know how many startups and Fortune 500 companies, but that right there is one of the biggest unspoken challenges that I think people don't know is how powerful it's. Like, for example, right now, we just implemented a value framework. So the salespeople are now getting like some of the metrics in the business case. They're doing a better job with it now, but 6 months ago they didn't. So all the pre-existing customers didn't have that baseline to be able to give to the customer success team to then measure against QBRs or EBR type reviews, so you have no idea. We have no idea like where they start from and where they end up and where's the value of that. And does the customer agree with it? Like all those things, because
100%.
then it makes both from a buyer perspective, like, how do I know this tool is actually justifiable with paying however much money for? And then from a seller's perspective is understanding where have we gone? What's the value of it from a marketing perspective or whatever lies, but how can we upsell because we're actually showing the value? Because I don't think
100%.
that's been talked about enough, which I love.
The other thing that we're witnessing already, even with our early stage customers, is by orienting everybody around business cases that have optimized based on the value proposition of that organization, you're actually orienting the entire organization around a clear value parameter. So you've got a whole GTM team that are all oriented around the same value optimization. So different people aren't thinking or imagining different components of their value proposition. Everybody's speaking a very consistent tone and selling based on the optimized value proposition of that organization. So value orientation is a really critical part of the introduction of a business case mentality for a company, for a GTM organization.
I love it. So I'm going to steer more towards AI. Now we have the kind of the context of value. So Xavier, question for you. Why AI in this conversation of business cases? Like we talked about how you can use the leverage of past data from Salesforce to get that. But what's the magic in AI in your mind of putting that power behind this whole concept? Why?
I think at the moment when companies sell to other companies, they put a lot of effort in their really big clients, and they might bring in their sales engineer, their designer, and so on, and really put the effort and love into that particular relationship. But when it comes to mid-market and maybe the kind of the 80% of their deals, they just don't have the time or the money or the effort that they can put into that. And what we're trying to do is bring that capacity of that team around you for every single deal in your pipeline.
So obviously, AI can give the context and the scalability to do both, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. In terms of tailoring to the particular client, taking in the context from its CRM, from the client brochure, the client website, etc., and incorporating that into the business case.
I love it. I'm gonna ask you a nerdy tech question. I usually ask this to most founders. Are you using your own models or are you plugging into like an API from Claude or ChatGPT? Which I don't care. I'm just curious of which one you do.
Yeah. At the moment, we're integrating with the GPT-4.
Cool. Awesome. And this is a nerdy question again. And I get you probably yes or no, but is it able to, I haven't seen the back end yet. So I haven't transparently, I've not seen the product in demo yet, but there's visuals that are part of the process, right? So it's not just the content, but actually visualizations of the content, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Freaking
It's a very powerful presentation layer. And I think just going back to the AI question before, there's a lot of automation that we're doing with integration of ChatGPT-4, of course, and that goes into automation of documents and support. But then there are language models that we will be building in over the next year or so, but that requires a lot more data sets. And as users engage and pull in their business cases, we can optimize for each organization based on the data that we're capturing. But that's in development, and it's something that I'm sure maybe at a later date, if we get invited back, we can share some of the outcomes of that.
I love it. I love it. So let me ask you this. I mean, I told you before the show that I'm all about in the academy of talking about not just learning tools and talk about tools, but what's the business impact of it. So with the beta customers you have, and you don't have to share any specific names, but I'd love to know, like, what is the business impact you're seeing as a result of using a tool like this that has this AI component, building a good, intelligent business case, and then, delivering it? What are you seeing as a result?
The most immediate one, which I think a lot of AI companies start off on, is operational efficiencies, right? Organizations are able to do much more with less. And I'm not saying fewer sales staff, I'm saying more pipeline, right? So it means that, like Xavier said, they're not just dedicating their value management team, which is a very precious resource, on those enterprise deals. A lot of that optimization can happen in a very automated and standardized way, which means that more people can do more and manage more pipeline without sacrificing quality. So that's kind of the base layer of the value that we can deliver, right? And we're seeing that based on a certain degree of acceleration of sales cycle, and also just the more deal flow per exec, right? The next layer that we're working on now is also enabling organizations to, again, get that optimization layer of the data points, but we don't yet, of course, have the outcomes on that yet.
I know it's still early, so it's hard to talk outcomes, but what I'm hearing in my mind is that there's pieces like this that come in alignment with affecting sales velocity, right? You just talked about capacity, which is number of opportunities. So you guys, are you familiar with sales velocity? I don't want to educate you if you're not, but you are. Okay, good. So the four main ones for anyone in the audience who doesn't know is number of opportunities, deal cycle, win rate, and average deal size. So what you just told me is like, even if you were able to, with this tool alone, impact any of those by 1 to 5%, that's a massive impact on everything, you know? So I love hearing that that's kind of like the focus you're going towards, is like saying, okay, what's the average deal size? Which I think a business case type of format, showing people like different options, is a way to increase your average deal size. You have your sales cycle, because obviously it shortens the decision-making process. And then you have your win ratio, because you're having business cases that can, expedite. And then, like you said, you have increased opportunities because you have more capacity to do more with less,
So for us, those are all outcomes that are critical and that we expect to deliver on. I think it's always a challenge when you go out to market and say there's no shortage of companies that say they
we do all this stuff, right?
All of those things, right? So we try to kind of temper that and say, look, this is what we know today, but this is what we assume based on everything that we're seeing, right? And we want to be very conservative in how we approach that. But the other component, which is really where Symbe started, is around empowering your champion, right? So one of the things that we see business cases doing today is, because they're collaborative, and what I mean by collaborative, you can invite your champion onto the business case, and together you can structure it based on what aligns both parties. But that champion then suddenly has that business case that their economic buyer is most likely going to ask them to build. And so by tooling them up with a business case that speaks the language of their economic buyer, be it CFO, procurement, or CEO, it means you're actually doing them a favor. They can advocate for you after you've left the room, so to speak, and you're effectively building something that it will be a foundation of a longer term relationship. So that collaboration is really key. I think we temper that as well, because most tools today need to be collaborative by nature, right? But we just feel like the value of this is you're making sure that you're aligning at all stages of that deal flow or deal cycle on what's most important to your prospect, which is the key to Medic as a whole.
Yeah, I was about to say, I had this report. I'm looking at this report so I can tell you exact numbers from Pavilion and EBSTA, actually. And they talked about how the difference between, and they analyzed like millions of opportunities. They talked about the impact of top performers use MedPick versus low performers. And the one thing that was pointed out as a vast difference was clarity to the economic buyer, and then champion support. So like, it's those two things, and that showed a 588% more likelihood of being a top performer and producing more than versus someone who did not do those two things. So to your point, super powerful. And I know you want to be conservative with like big numbers, because enablement marketing, no one can say I totally influence sales velocity by myself. It's a team effort, right? But I think that identifying that these little things that slowly increase each dial is like exponentially makes big differences on the back end, which is pretty powerful.
Agreed.
So let's shift away from Symbe, if it's okay with you. I want to talk AI in general. So go to market. What are you guys really excited about from your point, both as founders and then users of, I'm assuming users of AI? What are you excited about over this next year of happening in AI that you want to either implement yourself personally or in the company?
Do you want to go first there?
Yeah, the ability, a lot of the moment is done quite manually. So for example, following up on a deal and kind of sending emails at key touch points. And that plus proposals, plus entering into an RFP process, so much of that is unnecessary manual at the moment. And there's a huge potential to automate that. And not only to automate it, but to take into account the guidelines, the branding, the language of each company when generating those.
That's awesome. I love the thought of uplift of the manual process, like music to my ears, which is nice. What do you think, Martin?
Yeah, look, I think the benefit of AI in GTM is that there is just so much data out there, right? Because there's so much invested in all this tooling. All the tooling generates data. And because of the importance of GTM, it's the lifeblood of any company, to be honest, there's already innately a lot of integration in the whole ecosystem. That speaks to a fast development or evolution of how AI can collect all those data points and really build out an optimized flow of sales, right? If we're talking about velocity, AI will do an enormous job of driving velocity. And the benefit of AI in velocity is that this isn't one of those universes where AI will take jobs away. No, AI will just make companies grow more and faster, right? Which is effectively what we want. I'm an eternal optimist, right? But that's the way that I see it in this space.
I love it.
No, but it's true, right?
Yeah, I love it. So question for you, talking about like, we think about any company either wanting to implement their own product. Let's just talk about it more from the point of like taking your product like yours, implementing it. So whether it's your product or any product out there and they're trying to implement with their team, like what would you say are the things they should focus on when implementing it and things they should totally avoid to make sure they say, this is what's good, this is what you shouldn't do? What do you think?
It's listen to your beta customers like they are, I have quite a few of them, but listen, because a lot of the decisions that we've made, a lot of the assumptions that we made early on are just aren't being validated, whereas other little ideas that we had that we just thought would be a nice idea are massive value variant. I'll give you an example, right? Within Symbe, we had this new feature that we just launched, which is analytics, business case analytics. So a sales exec can actually see which their champion, who they share their business case with, and how many people have started to open it up within the organization. We thought that would be a nice to have, but it's giving, what we found in a lot of the interviews with sales execs is that it's actually giving them a lot of insight into the certainty of their deal moving forward. Because if that champion has suddenly shared the business case with their economic buyer, it tends to be when you share something with a prospect, you get this period of kind of the re-entry into the atmosphere where there's like a period of time where you don't hear from anybody and it gives a lot of nerves. In this case, if you actually see and you can track opening, it gives a lot more certainty and forecastability. That's one of those things that we learned just by testing out small features and can now invest much more in those categories. I don't know, Xavier, anything you want to add?
Well, I think with my CTO hat on, I think it's really essential at the beginning to release very quickly, take into account feedback, to do it slightly manually for your first users when they're coming up with new requirements, and then to see if those requirements hold true across other clients, and then to have a think, well, how can we incorporate it in the best way kind of for the long term so this can stand the test of time? And so that cadence of release and not being afraid to release small things in ways that might not necessarily be scalable, and then see what works, see what doesn't, drop some of it, change the other ones, and then solidify those things that do work.
Yeah,
and the same holds true for GPT integration, right? If you integrate it, test out little features, and even if they're, I wouldn't say hacked, but even if they're very imperfect and they only deliver a slight level of value, you can actually see what, if it does have a considerable path ahead, then you can invest more. But I would, definitely a lot of small bets to be able to test out which certain features work and which don't are the best approach.
I love it. So my original question was actually 2 in 1. So my apologies, because you answered definitely the first part. I'm gonna double down on the second part, which first part is, to your point, I know everybody's looking out there to either have GPT somehow involved with their product now or to build their own. Like what you just said, I think is golden. Let's talk about the other side of it, which is the user experience. You said you have teams of salespeople. People have to think differently about using AI, right? And yet it's another product, but it's different. It's not the same as other things they've had to do in the past. So when you've implemented this with your own customers, what do you think are the things that you should be looking for when someone like me, an enablement, I'm going to train my team, I'm going to do this change management around a new tool like Symbe. What are the things that people need to make sure they focus on for the user experience to make sure they're using it at the best capacity versus don't do this? Like, what have you seen in your experience?
I can talk a little bit up from the product side, just user adoption, really simplifying the user adoption. People don't have time. And the thing that you're always fighting against is inertia and people saying, look, I've got a huge sales tech stack. What's this other tool? How is this going to add value? And the second that they see it even slightly difficult to onboard or adopt, it's a really uphill battle. So we're focusing, doubling down, to the sacrifice of some additional innovative features, much more today on making sure that the tool is as intuitive to onboard as possible, even redesigning a lot of the user interface. Xavier.
Yeah, I think delighting the user is really key. I think in terms of making sure that you're doing the right things, I think having some kind of feedback mechanism. So tracking, for example, how users are interacting with your product. And for example, if you're integrating AI generation, enable the user to approve, to modify, and then track, are they approving it just as it is? Or are they modifying it a little bit? Or are they modifying it a lot? And then you can go back and say, well, they're modifying it a lot. We need to improve this. And just making sure that runs throughout your app so you can see what works and what doesn't.
I'm sensing as a pattern in general, as I've talked to like yourself and some of the founders, that when I've been on other enablement teams, like when I'm gonna compare this with you guys in a product, like you live and breathe and die on customer feedback, beta users, what they say in feedback. So like, for example, there's a couple of tools I use, I get feedback to, and they thank me like, thank you, this is great, because it helps their product be better. Sometimes with whether it's an enablement program or inner training or management program, whatever you want to call it, when someone critiques that, it's an attack versus saying it's a gift, So I think one thing I just want to point out that I'm hearing is that I need to think about this differently, is that it's an iteration process that founders are welcoming. Whereas sometimes in other parts of your work, sometimes I think enablement, me specifically, not recently, because I'm definitely in a building mode, but I know if there's been times where I've had critiques, I've taken as an attack versus saying it's an iteration. It's just like, okay, cool. How can we make it better? Tell me and I'll make it better for you, So I think it's pretty important. And I think a skill that I know you haven't talked about, but I think it's pretty important to make sure that it's vocalized, because I think it's impactful.
It's the brutal truths, right? Brutal truth is worth so much more than a nice compliment. And even somebody who is delusionally optimistic, I need to always temper that with brutal truths, right? Because that's the gold that will only help you improve. And you need to formulate a culture with your team, but also with your customers. Give me the brutal truths, right? Like that can only help us all.
Yeah, I love that. Well, we have a couple minutes left, so I just want to make sure I can point a couple of things. Your website is Symbe, Symbe.co, Symbe.co. I'll put the obviously website in the show notes. Anything else? And I just want to tell you both, thank you so much. One last thing I'd have you leave as we end up with this last question, which is, as people look to AI in the future, do you feel like they should look at it as a threat or something to augment what they're doing? What do you think?
I think it's very much like the internet or the mobile phone. So there's so much good that came out of it and a lot of dangers and risks that came out of it. But what's sure is that you can't avoid it. The world's going to be changed one way or the other. So I think the only thing you can do is try and use it as best as you can.
That's a good summary. Thank you, Xavier.
I've already told you I'm a delusional optimist, so you can see which way I'm going.
Right.
Yeah, look, anytime that you can optimize and automate in a scalable way, especially if we're talking about sales enablement in general, it can only be a good thing. And the way that we're seeing it is that our philosophy around our own product and AI is where our goal is to make a more efficient economy. Because if we can have AI supporting a buyer and seller in generating the most aligned commercial terms that form the foundation of their long-term relationship, then hopefully we are creating a world where there is a more efficient economy as a whole. That's the altruistic vision.
I love it. I'm on the same boat as you. Like, I'm definitely an optimist. So I have people around me that keep me real, but I love both sides because they're definitely needed. Xavier, Martin, thank you so much for being with me. I really appreciate it. I'm super excited to see what you guys come up with. And again, I'll be posting some stuff. And then hopefully soon I can get some sort of demo from you and I can put it in the AI demo tools library for people to actually see the tool in action, which would be cool. Yeah, but just want to say thank you. And for everyone else listening, tune in next time and see you later.
Thanks for listening to the GTM AI podcast. Please follow, subscribe, like, comment, and come back for more.